The cold winds of the north had always made Robert Baratheon feel like death was whispering in his ear, but this time he didn't turn away. He sat hunched atop his black destrier, a thick fur cloak stretched across his shoulders, eyes narrowed, against the icy breeze sweeping across the King's Road. Next to him rode Ned Stark, his old friend, his last true companion in a world filled with liars and vipers. It had been Ned who invited him north after Jon Arryn's death, but it was Robert who insisted they both ride together this time. Not just for the Lord of Winterfell's sake, but because something inside Robert had started to rot, not in his body, though that too was breaking down, but in his soul. Maybe it was Jon's sudden death, or Cersei's cold distance, or the way the crown felt heavier with each passing moon. But Robert had a feeling, a gut feeling, that things were unraveling, and he needed someone he could trust. Winterfell appeared like a shadowed giant at the end of the horizon, dark grey walls pushing out of the snow like old bones. It was the first time a king had come north in over a century, and the people lined the roads, faces pale with frost and curiosity. Ned dismounted first, face as unreadable as ever. His children came running toward him, Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran and little Rickon. Catelyn followed, more composed, but she too showed a flicker of surprise at the man who dismounted beside her husband, Robert Baratheon, the king, in the north. The feast that night was grand, with roasted boar, honeyed carrots, and enough ale to drown a ship. Yet Robert drank less than usual. His eyes scanned the hall, not with boredom, but with calculation. He watched Arya fight with her food, Sansa eye Joffrey with dreamy foolishness, and Bran climb a post when no one looked. He saw things others ignored. Ned noticed the change. "You're quieter than I remember," he said in their old chambers, where they shared a drink in private. Robert took a deep breath. "Too many years of noise, too many lies, Ned." He paused, swirling the wine in his cup. "Cersei wants power. Not me. She mourns Jon Arryn more for the secrets he might have known than for his loyalty." Ned stiffened. "What secrets?" Robert leaned closer, voice low. "He died digging. You know it. I know it. He visited you before he died for a reason." That was true. Jon had come to Winterfell months before he passed, and he'd left with questions on his lips, never answered. Robert continued, "I want to see the boy, the one with the silver hair, the bastard." "Jon? I? Lyanna's boy?" Ned's face froze. For a second, the fire crackled louder than any voice in the room. "He's my son," Ned replied, not blinking. Robert's expression softened. "I'm not here to take him or harm him, but I need to know, because if he is who I suspect, then your sister's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a sacrifice." Ned stood up, paced the floor once. The walls of Winterfell felt like they were closing in. "You've changed," he said quietly. Robert looked up, tired. "I have, because I finally realized the real war wasn't with Rhaegar. It's with those who rule behind curtains, Cersei, her father, the Lannisters." That night, a raven flew from Winterfell toward Castle Black, carrying a message no one expected. And far beyond the wall, in a place of snow and silence, something stirred. For the first time in decades, fate had changed its course. Because Robert Baratheon did go north, and nothing would be the same again. Robert Baratheon stood at the edge of Winterfell's Godswood the next morning, staring at the heart tree with its weeping red eyes. His breath came in thick clouds, hands folded behind his back. He hadn't visited a Godswood since before the rebellion. The old gods had never meant much to him, but here, with Ned beside him and ghosts of the past rising like mist, he felt their presence more than ever. "I see her when I close my eyes," Robert muttered. Ned didn't ask who, he knew. Lyanna would have hated this throne, Ned, all of it. She'd have spit on the crown, just to prove a point. "You never truly knew her," Ned said quietly, not as a judgment, but as a fact. Robert didn't argue, for once. She loved Rhaegar, Ned added, his voice almost cracking. She left willingly. The war, it wasn't what we thought it was. That hit harder than any blade. Robert turned, jaw tight. Don't say that. Don't make him a hero. He stole her. No, Ned interrupted, calm but firm. She chose him, and you burned a kingdom chasing a lie. Robert's fists clenched, and for a moment Ned thought they might come to blows. But instead the king turned away, shoulders sinking. All my life I've been drunk on rage, Robert whispered. I built a throne on vengeance and filled it with rot. He looked up, eyes clearer than they'd been in years. And Cersei knows. She knows Jon isn't mine or yours. She knows the boy is a threat to her children. That's why I brought you north. That's why I had to see the boy for myself. Far beneath Winterfell, in the crypts, Jon Snow walked alone. He often came here when the walls of the castle felt too tight, or when watching Robb and Theon train became unbearable. The statues didn't judge him. The dead had no scorn for bastards. He paused at Lyanna Stark's tomb. I don't know who I am, he whispered, but I hope you'd have cared, even if I'm not meant to belong. Jon, came Ned's voice behind him. He turned quickly, startled, but it wasn't just Ned who stood there. It was the king. Robert Baratheon looked at the boy for a long moment. There was something ancient in his eyes, some deep, buried truth clawing its way to the surface. So this is him, Robert said softly, the bastard of Winterfell. Ned moved to speak, but Robert raised a hand. No, let me talk. Jon stood straighter, confused, wary. Your Grace. Robert stepped forward. How old are you, boy? 17, my lord. Robert nodded. Old enough to swing a sword, old enough to die for a name that isn't yours. Jon's brow furrowed. I don't understand. No, Robert said bitterly, you wouldn't. Because you were hidden, shielded from the truth, for your safety, for the sake of lies that served us all. Jon looked to Ned, who was silent, jaw clenched. Your mother, Robert said, stepping closer to the statue of Lyanna, was the only woman I ever loved, but she never loved me back. She died with another man's child in her arms, a prince's child. You. Jon's breath caught. What are you saying? Robert looked him dead in the eyes. You're not Ned's bastard. You're Lyanna's son, and Rhaegar Targaryen's. The words dropped like stones. Jon staggered back a step, eyes wide. No, that's not possible. I wish it weren't, Ned said softly. But it is. I kept you hidden, even from the king, because his rage would have meant your death. Jon turned to Robert. And now? Robert paused. The silence between them was suffocating. I don't want you dead, he said at last. Not anymore. You're her last breath, maybe the last good thing either of us ever did. Far above the crypts, in the highest tower of Winterfell, Catelyn Stark stood behind a curtain, watching the Lannister children play in the snow. Joffrey had knocked Arya down with a snowball, and Sansa was scolding him. Catelyn's eyes narrowed. She hadn't missed the glances Robert had exchanged with her husband, or the quiet conversations when they thought no one listened. Something was happening, and whatever it was, it threatened everything. Later that night, a raven flew from Winterfell to King's Landing. Catelyn didn't trust Cersei, but sometimes keeping the wolves at bay meant feeding one lion a secret at a time. Jon Snow didn't sleep that night. He paced the courtyard long after the others had gone to bed, boots crunching lightly on frost-bitten stones. The wind bit into his face, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside him. Targaryen. That word haunted him. The blood of mad kings and dragons ran in his veins. Everything he thought he knew about himself had shattered beneath. The crypts of Winterfell, crushed by one truth Ned Stark had kept buried his entire life. He had no name, no place. And now, Not even a father. Only ghosts. Behind him, footsteps approached. Not loud. Careful. He didn't turn. "You lied to me," Jon said quietly. "All this time." Ned's voice was soft. "I did." Jon turned. Now, eyes fierce. "You let me grow up thinking I was your shame." "I took the shame to protect you," Ned said. "Your name would have signed your death warrant, Jon. If Robert had known back then—" "But he knows now," Jon snapped. "So what changes?" Ned hesitated. "That depends on you and him." In the great hall, Robert sat by the hearth alone, cup in hand, but barely drinking. The flames reflected in his tired eyes. He didn't even look up when Catelyn Stark entered. She came without pretense. Just silence, and that cold northern tension between them. "You made a mistake coming here," she said after a while. Robert's head tilted slightly. "Have I?" "Bringing war back to our doorstep," she said, folding her arms. "You stirred something that should have stayed buried." Robert finally looked up at her. "That boy deserves to know what he is." "No," she snapped, stepping forward. "He deserves peace. Not your crown, not your enemies, not your poisoned—" "Court?" Robert studied her. "You never liked him, did you?" "I tolerated him," she said coldly, "for Ned's sake, but that's over now. You've pulled him into something he'll never escape, and if you think the Lannisters will let this stand—" "I want them to know," Robert interrupted. "Let Tywin sweat. Let Cersei squirm. I'm tired of pretending her golden-haired bastards are mine." Catelyn narrowed her eyes. "Then say it in court. Say Joffrey isn't yours. Say Jon is the true heir. Go on. See what happens next." Robert was silent. He wouldn't. Not yet. Because even a king had to play the game, and the game was turning dangerous. South of Winterfell, the snow had not yet buried the roads entirely. Riders moved swiftly under nightfall, cloaked in gold and black. They didn't wear banners, but their silence spoke volumes. Inside one of the travelling carriages sat a woman with emerald eyes and a smile sharp as a blade. Cersei Lannister had received the raven, and though the words had been veiled, the meaning was clear. Robert was playing with fire, and worse, he was doing it far from her reach. She poured herself wine with an unshaking hand. "If he thinks he can take my children's future, he'll find out what a lioness does when her cubs are threatened." Beside her, Jaime Lannister smirked faintly. "You always did like Winterfell," he said. "I never thought I'd see you go back." "I'm not going to visit," Cersei replied. "I'm going to destroy whatever treason Robert has found comfort in. And if that bastard boy thinks he's a threat to my Joffrey—" Her words trailed off like a warning in the wind. Back. In Winterfell, Sansa Stark watched Jon from the shadows of a hallway. She'd overheard enough. Not all, but enough to know something had changed. He wasn't her brother, not truly, not anymore. She didn't know if that made her angry or jealous or just afraid. "You should be careful," came a voice beside her. She flinched, turning to find Littlefinger. How long had he been there? How long had he known? "What do you mean?" she asked warily. He smiled, always too close, always too smooth. "When bloodlines change, so do crowns, and you know what happens to the daughters of noble houses when crowns begin to fall." He leaned in, voice like a whispered spell. "Choose who you love wisely, Sansa, because soon everyone will want something from Jon Snow." That night, Jon stood at the top of Winterfell's wall, staring into the blackness of the woods. He didn't know where the path ahead led. Only that the moment Robert Baratheon rode through the gates, his world had split open. Behind him, a soft creak of snow. He turned and saw Ghost, his direwolf, standing beside him in the moonlight, red eyes alert. A storm was coming, and now it was too late to turn back. The raven landed at Maester Luwin's rookery just past dawn, talons clicking on cold stone. It bore the royal seal, but it wasn't from King's Landing. No, this one came from Castle Black. Luwin read it once, then twice, his lips tightening. Without waiting for a servant, he hurried down the tower, robes flapping like wings in the wind. Inside the great hall, Robert and Ned were already deep in conversation over a cold breakfast of salted pork and brown bread. John sat nearby, quiet, trying not to look at either of them. His mind still swirled from the truth. The silence between them all was heavy, until Lewin burst in, face pale. "A raven," he said breathlessly. "From the wall." Robert raised an eyebrow. "Another. This one bears grave news," Lewin said, unrolling the parchment. "Benjen Stark has gone missing beyond the wall. He and his men were tracking. Reports of wildlings, strange behavior, villages emptied. They found nothing. Only cold, silence, and blood." Ned stood up at once. "When?" "Nearly a fortnight ago," Lewin said. "The Lord Commander delayed sending word, hoping Benjen would return." He handed the letter to Ned, who read it with clenched fists. Robert rubbed his jaw. Benjen Stark. Always had the courage of 10 men, but the North has always hidden darker things than wolves. "It's not just that," Lewin said. "The Rangers who returned, those who did, speak of shadows that move without sound, and bodies that don't stay buried." A silence fell over the hall. John looked up suddenly. "The dead?" Lewin nodded gravely. "The Night's Watch believes the old tales are stirring." Robert laughed bitterly. "I came north for politics, not children's stories." But Ned didn't laugh. He was still reading, still frowning. Benjen wouldn't vanish without a reason, and if something truly is stirring beyond the wall... Robert waved a hand. "Fine, I'll send men north with supplies, but I didn't come here to chase ghosts. I came to decide what to do with the boy and the throne." John bristled. "I don't want your throne!" Robert looked at him then. Hard. "Doesn't matter what you want. It matters what others think you might want." Later that day, the Lannister carriage crossed the outer gates of Winterfell. Gold and crimson drapes flapped behind it. Inside, Cersei stared at the castle walls like a snake sizing up a bear's den. Jaime rode beside the coach, smug and silent. They weren't here for diplomacy. They were here to kill any rising threat before it took root. When they entered the hall, Cersei wore her warmest smile. But it fooled no one. "Your Grace," she said sweetly to Robert, dipping in a practiced curtsy. "It seems the North has aged you." Robert barely looked at her. "Not as much as marriage has aged me." Ned glanced between them. The venom was no longer subtle. Cersei's eyes scanned the room until they landed on John. She hesitated. "So this is the boy?" she asked. "The bastard." John stood tall. "Yes, my queen." She smiled thinly. "You look so much like your father." John didn't answer. He wasn't sure who that even meant anymore. That night the Lannisters dined with the Starks and the king. The tension could have been cut with a dagger. Cersei made polite conversation with Sansa and Catelyn, while Jaime watched Arya toss knives at her dinner plate. Robert drank more than usual, because that's what he did when things grew unbearable. Halfway through the meal, Cersei leaned across the table and said softly to Robert, "Do you truly think naming him will solve your problems?" Robert met her gaze. "I haven't named anyone yet." "But you're thinking about it," she said, voice like a knife in the dark. "You forget who holds the court in your absence." "I forget nothing," Robert said, "and I fear nothing." "Then you're a fool." The room went quiet at her words. Even the fire seemed to hush. Jaime stood slowly. "My queen, shall we retire?" She stood as well, but not before offering one last look to John. "It's dangerous rising above your station, especially when your bloodline is unstable." Then she was gone. Ned sat with John late that night near the old blacksmith's forge, where the heat kept the frost from creeping into their bones. "If they know," John said, "they'll kill me." Ned didn't deny it. They will try. So what do we do? Ned looked up at the stars. We survive until winter passes, until Robert makes his move, until you decide what kind of man you want to be. Jon nodded, but his jaw was tight. And if I don't want to be a king? Then don't be, Ned said, but that won't stop them from fearing you as one. Meanwhile, in the lower dungeons, far from the noise and feasting, a hooded figure met with Maester Luwin. They exchanged words no one heard, and passed a sealed letter to be sent only by the blackest of ravens. Because far to the east, in exile, a girl with silver hair and fire in her blood had just received word of a name long thought dead, Aegon, Targaryen, and she was coming home. The snows fell harder the next morning. Thick, blinding sheets of white covered Winterfell like a funeral shroud. Yet even in the blizzard, the castle stirred. Whispers flew like ravens, fast and quiet. The Lannisters had arrived. The king was brooding, and Jon Snow wasn't Ned Stark's son after all. Word had begun to leak, dripping through the walls, like melting ice. Servants spoke in hushed tones. Soldiers eyed Jon differently. Even Robb looked at him with something between confusion and resentment. He wasn't just a bastard anymore. He was dangerous. In the war room, Robert stood over the great map of Westeros, his hands shaking. Not from age, but from indecision. Ned stood beside him, quiet as always. "They'll never accept it," Robert muttered. "Not the small folk, not the lords. A Targaryen on the throne, even if he's got your blood. It'll start a war." Ned folded his arms. "So will hiding him. So will Cersei." "She already suspects," Robert said. "Her eyes were knives last night. If she moves first—" "She won't," Ned said. "Not here, not in Winterfell." Robert looked at him doubtful. "You still don't understand what she's capable of." But even as he said it, a scream echoed across the courtyard. A man ran from the stables covered in blood. His throat had been slashed open, clean, quiet, precise. Another body was found, slumped against the inner gate, a dagger buried in his back. He had been one of Robert's personal guards, assassins. Inside Jon's chambers, Ghost was already growling. The direwolf stood protectively in front of Jon, eyes locked on the door. And not a moment too soon. The door burst open with a loud crack. Two hooded men rushed inside, silent as winter itself, blades in hand. Jon rolled to the floor, just barely dodging a swipe aimed for his neck. Ghost lunged, tearing into the first man's arm with a snarl that echoed through the hall. Jon grabbed the edge of the desk and swung it upward, slamming it into the second attacker's face. Blood sprayed across the stone floor. But the first man recovered fast, grabbing Ghost by the scruff and throwing him against the wall with a grunt. The direwolf yelped and hit the ground hard. Jon barely had time to think. He grabbed the fallen dagger and plunged it upward as the assassin lunged. The blade sank deep into the man's gut, and for a moment there was nothing but silence, broken only by the man's sharp gasp before he collapsed in Jon's arms. Footsteps thundered down the hall. Robb, Theon, and Ned burst in. "Jon!" Robb shouted. Jon stood over the bodies, chest heaving, blood on his hands. "They tried to kill me," he said. Ned turned over one of the bodies, pulling down the mask. A golden pin fell to the floor. A lion Lannister. Robert stood beside the corpses not long after, face pale with fury. "She sent them," he whispered. "She sent them to kill a boy in my own house." "Are you surprised?" Ned asked bitterly. "You gave her children. Robert, she gave you war." Robert shook his head. "Not anymore. This ends now. I'll ride south. I'll call the banners. If Tywin wants war, he'll get it. And this time I won't stop until the lion's den burns." But it was already too late. Cersei was gone. Disappeared from Winterfell in the night, leaving nothing behind but her empty bedchamber and 3 missing guards. Far away, deep in the frost-bitten woods, Cersei's carriage carved a lonely path through the snow. She sat still, her expression cold as stone. Jaime rode ahead, alert. A letter sat in her lap, sealed with wax and sent to Tywin himself. It contained 3 words: "Kill the bastard." Back in Winterfell, Maester Luwin pulled Ned aside quietly. "We received another raven this morning," he said. "From Essos." Ned's brow furrowed. "Essos? From whom?" Luwin hesitated. "It names the girl, Daenerys Targaryen, says she has dragons." Ned blinked. "That's impossible." "No," Luwin said grimly. "Apparently it's not. She's alive, and she's coming." That night, Jon stood at the top of the highest tower looking out across the land. Snow drifted from the sky, but all he saw was fire. He was hunted now, a boy with no name, no peace, no safety, only war in his blood. Behind him, Ghost limped forward, pressing close. Jon looked down at the valley. "They'll come for me," he whispered. Ghost growled low. "Let them try." 3 days after the assassination attempt, the gates of Winterfell remained sealed. Guards doubled their shifts, archers manned the walls, and no one entered without a name or a face. The north had turned quiet, the kind of quiet that always came before a blood-soaked storm. Robert Baratheon hadn't left his chambers, not because of fear, but because he was drowning in fury. He'd sent 3 ravens already, 1 to Tywin Lannister, demanding an explanation for the attack, 1 to Renly, commanding him to prepare the Stormlands, and the 3rd to Stannis. That last one was different. It wasn't a command, it was a warning. If war came, Robert knew who would stand behind him, and who might try to take the crown the moment he fell. In the Godswood, Jon trained with Robb beneath the red leaves. Their swords clashed quietly, controlled and focused, but it wasn't a friendly match. "You should have told me," Robb growled between swings. "All this time, I thought you were my brother." "I am your brother," Jon snapped back. "That hasn't changed." "You have Targaryen blood," Robb said. "You're not just some bastard anymore. You're something else." Jon lowered his sword. "And what are you? The heir to Winterfell?" Robb flinched. "That's not what I meant," Jon said quickly. "I don't want your place. I never did." Robb's voice dropped. "You don't have to want it. People will give it to you anyway, just to spite me, just to make chaos." They stared at each other. 2 boys raised as brothers, now standing on the edge of 2 very different destinies. Elsewhere in the castle, Sansa sat with Catelyn in her chamber, brushing her auburn hair slowly. "I still love Joffrey," Sansa said quietly. Catelyn paused. "You don't even know him." "I don't care," Sansa said, eyes distant. "He's a prince. He's beautiful. He'll be king." Catelyn sighed. "And he'll marry someone who helps the Lannisters keep power, not a Stark girl whose family may be sheltering a traitor." Sansa turned to her mother, confused. "Jon, he hasn't done anything wrong." Catelyn's jaw tightened. "He's a Targaryen. He doesn't have to do anything. His existence is enough." That evening, Ned and Robert sat in the crypts. Once again, this time before Lyanna's tomb. The firelight danced across her stone face. Robert had aged a lifetime in just a few days. "I've sent for Stannis," he said. "He's cold, but he's loyal, more than I deserve." Ned looked at him, wary. "And what about Jon?" Robert sighed. "You were right. I never knew Lyanna. Not really. I made her into something she wasn't. A story, a dream." He looked at Jon's name carved into a stone in his hand. "But the boy, he's real, and I won't let Cersei's madness destroy what's left of her." Ned frowned. "Then say it out loud. Tell the realm. Proclaim him your heir." Robert chuckled bitterly. "That would be suicide. Half the realm would rebel, the other half would cheer, and I'd be dead before the moon turns." Ned nodded. "So you'll wait." "I'll watch," Robert corrected. "And if Jon proves worthy, I'll name him, but not yet. Not while lions circle." Far to the east, in the red sands of Essos, Daenerys Targaryen stood barefoot on the edge of a cliff. 3 dragons circled above her, small still, but growing faster than anyone believed possible. Behind her, Ser Jorah approached, carrying the Raven's letter. She read it carefully. "The bastard of the north, son of Rhaegar, raised by wolves." She said nothing at first, just stared into the crashing sea. "Do you believe it?" Jorah asked. "I don't need to believe it," Daenerys said, "because if it's true, I'm not the last Targaryen anymore. And if he claims the throne before you," she turned to him, calm and cold, "then I'll take it back, from him or from his ashes." Meanwhile, in the Westerlands, Tywin Lannister stood before the body of the fallen assassin returned by Raven from Winterfell. He wasn't angry. He was calculating. "The attack failed," Keevan said beside him. "Cersei acted too quickly." "No," Tywin murmured. "She acted emotionally. That's her weakness. But it gave us clarity." Keevan frowned. "And what's our next move?" Tywin looked up at the map of Westeros, eyes fixed on the north. "We bury them, all of them, slowly, quietly. We'll bleed the north until Winterfell is a graveyard, and when the snow thaws, we'll ride through the mud in silence." He placed a marker on the board. "The Starks won't survive 2 Targaryens." Back in Winterfell, Jon stood in the courtyard watching Ghost limp slightly as he walked. He reached down, scratching behind the direwolf's ears. "They'll come for me again, won't they?" he whispered. Ghost didn't growl, didn't move, just sat with him quiet. "I don't even know who I am," Jon said, "but they've already decided what I'm worth." From behind, Arya approached. "You're worth more than any crown." Jon smiled faintly. "You don't even like me half the time." Arya smirked. "I still wouldn't let them kill you." They stood together as the snow fell around them, alone but not broken. And in the skies beyond the wall, a different storm was brewing, one with no crown, no name, and no mercy, because the dead were moving again, and neither lions nor wolves were ready for what was coming. They rode through snow that swallowed men whole. Jeor Mormont, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, had led what remained of the scouting party back to Castle Black. Faces were pale, eyes wide. Some had stopped speaking altogether. Only one thing echoed in their silence. Death walked beyond the wall. Not wildlings, not wolves. Something worse. "We saw them," said one ranger. "Men with no breath. Eyes like frost. They didn't bleed. We cut one down, and it just kept crawling." Mormont nodded grimly. "The others have returned." He penned the message himself. Not to King's Landing, not to Old Town, to Winterfell, to Ned Stark, and he marked it. With urgency. Winter is no longer coming. It is here. At Winterfell, Jon Snow trained harder than ever. He couldn't sleep anymore. Not after the attempt on his life, not after learning the truth. He didn't know what he was, bastard, prince, weapon, or curse, but he knew what he had to become. A soldier. Robb joined him at dawn most days, and though the tension had cooled between them, it still hung in the air like a sword never fully sheathed. "You'll need armor better than Stark leather," Robb said one morning. Jon grunted between strikes. "Why? So it slows me down when they stab me in the back?" Robb smirked. "It's not me you have to worry about." Jon paused. "No, it's everyone else." The Raven from Castle Black arrived by midday. Maester Luwin's face turned ghostly as he read the message aloud to Robert and Ned. "They're not stories," Robert muttered. "The dead walk again." Ned nodded, already grim. "I believe it." Robert slammed his goblet onto the table. "Then we need to send men, real men, not crows, not thieves and bastards in black, knights, houses, banners. Who will follow?" Ned asked. "When the South thinks the war is about crowns, not corpses." Robert looked at Jon. You saw it, didn't you? In your dreams, in the fire. John froze. Yes, I think so. They don't speak. They just come, like a wave, cold, endless. Robert nodded. Then it's time they see what kind of weapon Lyanna left behind. Down in the armory, Gendry pounded steel without pause. The king's bastard, still unknown to Robert, had been working with Winterfell's blacksmith since they arrived, but it wasn't just swords and axes anymore. Gendry had begun reforging ancient dragon glass that Samwell Tarly had smuggled south months ago. These are what the Night's Watch used against the others, Sam explained. If they're real, and we now know they are, this is the only thing that stops them. Gendry nodded. Then I'll make enough to arm the north. Sam handed him a dusty scroll. You'll need this. What is it? Gendry asked. A Targaryen design, Sam said. Old Valyrian, meant for dragonfire, or maybe something else. That night in his tower, Robert called Jon privately. He poured 2 cups of wine but drank neither. Do you know what I regret most? Robert asked. Jon didn't answer. Not killing Rhaegar, not the war, not even marrying Cersei. I regret not listening to Ned when he begged me to stop chasing ghosts. Jon watched him carefully. And what am I? Another ghost? Robert looked him in the eye. No. You're the last chance to make peace with mine. He pulled a scroll from beneath the desk, sealed with the royal stamp. I want you to ride south, Robert said, to the Eyrie, to Lord Arryn's son. Rally them to the cause. Tell them what's coming. Jon hesitated. And if they don't believe me? Robert grinned faintly. Then show them your blood, because whether you want it or not, it is Targaryen. Meanwhile, far to the east, Daenerys stood. In the ruins of old Valyria, the sky was black with ash. Dragons flew overhead, larger now, hungrier. Jorah came to her side. The ships are ready. The Golden Company awaits. Daenerys nodded. And Jon Snow? Jorah frowned. Still in the north, still alive. Daenerys touched her dragon scales, eyes burning with cold fire. Then we ride for Westeros, she said, but not to join him. To take what's mine. Back in the north, Bran Stark returned home. He rode into Winterfell unannounced, older, stranger. His eyes had changed, his voice distant. Arya hugged him first, but even she noticed the chill behind his smile. What happened to you? She asked. Bran looked at her with eyes that no longer belonged to a boy. I saw the wall fall. I saw the White Walkers enter the realm of men, and I saw a dragon burn 1,000 souls. Arya blinked. In a dream? Bran looked away. No, in time. That night from the highest tower, Ned watched the horizon. Snow fell quiet, peaceful, but it was a lie. Because somewhere out there, in the trees beyond the wall, blue eyes opened in the dark and marched forward. The horns of Winterfell cried, out at dawn, a long, low sound that hadn't been heard in generations, the sound of war, but not war for crowns, for land, or legacy, war for survival. The first to see them was a boy on the watchtower who nearly fell from his post when he realized the shapes in the woods weren't shadows. They were men, or once were. Thousands of them. The White Walkers had arrived. Robert stood in full, armor in the courtyard. The black stag on his chest faded, dented, but still proud. Ned Stark stood beside him, quiet and cold, great sword in hand. They'll come fast, Ned said. No fear, no pain, just hunger. Robert nodded. Good. Then they'll meet men who know how to bleed. Jon rode to them, cloaked in black and silver. His sword, freshly forged dragon glass, gleamed with an eerie sheen. Ghost was at his side, snarling at the horizon. Where's Bran? He asked. Gone to the Godswood, Arya answered, sliding a thin blade into her belt. He said he needed to be where the old magic lives. Jon frowned. He's going to try something, isn't he? Arya nodded. He always does. Outside. The walls, the snow trembled. Then they came. The first wave hit like a tidal surge. Dead wildlings, Night's Watch deserters, even former northern bannermen reanimated by icy will. Eyes blue as the winter sky. No voices, no mercy. They climbed. The walls like ants. They burned when pierced by dragonglass and Valyrian steel. But for everyone that fell, 5 more came behind it. The archers fired until their quivers ran dry. The soldiers fought shoulder to shoulder. Robert himself swung his warhammer with such force that bones shattered like glass. Jon fought at the front. He moved like a blur, Ghost always beside him, ripping apart the dead with fang and fury. But it wasn't enough. They kept coming. In the Godswood, Bran sat beneath the weirwood tree, eyes rolled back. He had entered the mind of a raven, then a wolf, then something deeper. He reached across the cold winds, past the veil of time and life, and found them. The others, the walkers, the Night King. But this time, Bran didn't run. He pushed, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the Night King faltered, just for a moment. But it was enough. At the center of the battlefield, a cry rose, not from the living, but the sky, a roar of flame and fury. A dragon, but not Daenerys's. Second dragon, smaller, pale, with eyes like Jon's. It burst from the clouds, spewing fire not red but white-hot, flame that melted ice like wax. Jon turned, stunned. Bran had done something impossible. He had awakened the blood inside. Jon and the dragon had answered. The tide turned. The flames cleared a path, and Jon moved through it like judgment made flesh. He found the Night King at the ridge, towering, silent, death incarnate. For a moment, they stared at each other. Man and myth. Blood of Targaryen. Blood of winter. Then they charged. Their blades clashed, ice and fire hissing with each strike. The wind screamed around them, and when the final blow came, Jon buried the dragonglass sword deep into the Night King's chest. For a second, nothing happened. Then cracks spread across the Night King's body like shattered glass. He fell, not like a man, but like a mountain of ice collapsing into dust, and as he died, so did his army. The dead collapsed, everywhere. The battlefield was quiet. Winterfell stood, scarred and smoking, but alive. Robert limped through the wreckage, bloodied and exhausted. Ned stood beside him, helping the wounded. Arya knelt beside fallen friends, silent tears running down her cheeks. Jon stood at the gate, looking toward the dawn. Behind him the pale dragon circled once, then vanished beyond the trees, a guardian of the north, born of blood and war. In the weeks that followed, word spread like wildfire. The dead had risen, the north had held, and a Targaryen had saved the realm. But Robert did not return to King's Landing. He left his crown in the crypts of Winterfell, laid gently beside Lyanna's statue. She never wanted a king, he said, but maybe she raised one. Then he sailed away to where no one knew. Ned returned to the Godswood every day, watching over Bran, who barely spoke now. He had become something else entirely. Arya trained in silence, faster than ever. Sansa learned letters from Maester Luwin, but read between the lines of every letter. From the south, Robb became Lord of Winterfell, and Jon stood before the people not as king, not as Targaryen, not even as Snow. He stood as protector. The crown was offered. He refused it. I was born from fire and lies, he said, but I will live in truth. Let the realm heal. Let Winterfell lead. And the people followed him, not because of blood, but because of who he chose to be. Not a ruler, not a dragon, but a shield. The war for the throne never came, because the realm had learned what truly mattered, not power, not names, but survival and sacrifice, and it all changed. Because Robert Baratheon went north.